when we look particularly at the political events of this election season, what we will see is that prior falling transitions in the market have provided some of the best historical analogs to what we see today. Hello, I'm Matt Lampert.
Greetings, I'm Robert Folsom.
Welcome to Mood and Markets, where we talk about how social mood moves trends in the financial markets and beyond. That's what the science of socioeconomics is all about.
Indeed, Matt. Our topic today takes us beyond the markets and into the political world to revisit how social mood shapes the outcomes of presidential elections. We addressed this question earlier this year in Mood Markets, and we promised to update our election analysis before the vote on November 5th. And I'll tell you, Matt, I'm glad we waited until now to do that. So much has happened in the intervening months. It's kind of hard to know where to begin.
Well, Robert, so much has happened. When we talked about the 2024 election back in January, the three candidates we discussed were Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Only one of those remains in the race, and even he wouldn't have made it if not for an opportune head turn on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, Matt, what we know is this presidential season has seemed abnormal because it has been abnormal. Yet we can use socioeconomics to make some sense of it and even to get an idea of what may be next. But before we talk about the election maybes to come, I suppose we should mention the two biggest headline stories thus far in the race. Two attempts on the life of a major party candidate, one of which nearly succeeded. Donald Trump was shot in July. You just alluded to it. The other story was the game-changing decision by incumbent President Biden to withdraw from the race and endorse his sitting VP to run for president. And last but not at all least, we have multiple wars being waged globally. And that's led some observers to say this could produce World War III. And that's happening even as U.S. stock market indexes remain near record highs.
That's right, Robert. And the record highs, that's certainly true of the American blue chips in nominal terms. Now, just to give some broader context on Mood and Markets, we have shown the Dow measured not in dollars, but in gold, which peaked back in 1999. And even in nominal terms, the Russell 2000, which is a broad small cap index, peaked a few years ago. And let's not forget that the trends of other global markets, particularly where we've seen some of those intense military conflicts, those have been less positive as well. But I will say, Robert, anecdotally, whenever I've taken a look at a trend and I've just felt, gosh, this really looks out of whack with where the market would indicate social mood should be, I think when that's happened just about universally, it's come at what have turned out to be specific junctures in the mood trend, namely transitional phases where the mood trend was shifting from positive to negative or vice versa. And when we look particularly at the political events of this election season, what we will see is that prior falling transitions in the market have provided some of the best historical analogs to what we see today.
You know, and again, by falling transition, Matt, you mean social mood itself changes from a positive to a negative trend. And in the stock market, that means a turn from up to down, from bullish to bearish. Of course, our colleagues at Elliott Wave International forecast the specific market patterns, but we can observe socioeconomically that those transitional phases are where we do often see an especially lively mix of positive and negative expressions of mood.
Yes, of course, there's always a mix to some degree, but as you alluded to, that mix of trends tends to be particularly pronounced, particularly lively in those transitional phases. Now, one transitional phase that's especially relevant to the events of the 2024 campaign is the falling transition from 1966 to 1972.
Right, and the preceding positive trend began in 1942 and had a 24-year run until 1966. We obviously have the benefit of hindsight, but it's not like 1966 suddenly flipped a switch to a conspicuously negative mood. What happened instead is 1966 began a transitional period, and it was marked by a lot of social tumult and three intervening highs in the market. The first was in 66, the second was 68, and in January 1973 was the third. The first presidential election during that foreign transition was 1968. Lyndon Johnson was the incumbent, and he could have run for a second term. He was eligible to do that, but he withdrew from the race. So, Matt, it's been 56 years since an incumbent president decided to seek a second term, but that bit of history repeated itself in 2024.
Yes, that's one historical analog for sure. And even the reasons for Johnson dropping out of the race are similar. At the time, back in 68, he had health concerns, and members of his party had concerns about his popularity. And those were certainly two refrains we heard about in 2024 regarding President Biden's decision to withdraw. The only other president to withdraw from a run for re-election after starting to campaign was Harry Truman. That was also in another transitional phase, that time a rising transition back in 1952.
Right. Well, one other analog comes to mind from 68. It's the assassination of Robert Kennedy. He entered the race soon after LBJ withdrew. Kennedy was himself shot and killed in June 1968, and it happened on the night he'd won the California Democratic primary.
Yes, and I'm sure you saw all the articles that came out after the first Trump assassination attempt in July that looked at the timing of presidential assassinations, but it's really the timing of assassination attempts on presidential candidates that's the more precise analog. And as you point out, Robert, regarding 1968, there was an assassination of a major party candidate prior to the convention. Interestingly, the second presidential election held in that 1966 to 72 following transition phase also contained an assassination attempt on a candidate, and that was the attempt on a life of a candidate, Robert, whose story you know very well.
Indeed. In 1972, Alabama Governor George Wallace ran in the Democratic primaries to be the nominee for president from that party. He had run as a third-party candidate in 68, and he carried 5 states, including Michigan. But in May of 72, Wallace was shaking hands at a campaign stop, and he took 4 bullets from the assassin. He lived, but he was paralyzed from the waist down. And I described the many similarities between George Wallace and Donald Trump back in a 2016 speech that I gave at the Social Mood Conference. Yeah, in brief, both of those candidates are in the tradition of populist demagogues. They exploit polarized electorate. They flout political norms like civility. They strategically pick fights with the media. They demean their opponents and position themselves as the David fighting the establishment Goliath. They also single out a group as the other. And for Wallace, that meant making segregation a campaign issue. But Donald Trump's preferred issue is immigration.
So, Robert, in the 2 presidential elections that ran in that falling transition of 1966 to 72, we had an incumbent withdrawing from the race and multiple candidates facing assassination attempts. We also, in the 68 race, had a sitting vice president step into the race as the incumbent party's nominee after the president chose to discontinue running for another term.
Right, and that leads to the question, has the stock market's performance anticipated the election winner when a sitting vice president sought the promotion to the presidency? I know that in 2012, you and your colleagues published a paper, and it found that the stock market was a reliable election indicator, but only in elections when the incumbent president runs for a second term. Did you learn anything else about incumbent vice presidents who run?
Yeah, that vice president question, Robert, is so interesting because back in our 2012 paper, it was published in Sage Open, we studied the stock market's performance prior to every presidential election, going all the way back to George Washington. And as you mentioned, we did find that the market was a reliable election indicator when the incumbent sought another term. Now, interestingly, we found that the correlation between the market's prior performance and the subsequent margin of victory or defeat for the incumbent party dropped to nearly 0 in elections without an incumbent president running, meaning that there's basically no relationship at all in those cases between the market's performance and the subsequent election outcome. But Robert, we did not specifically isolate the case history of elections where a sitting vice president sought another term. So I ran those numbers this year, and the results were pretty intriguing.
A sitting vice president's not the president, but the incumbent administration in that administration, they are the second in command. And sociologists, and we expect the social mood trend to regulate the public perception of the leader. So maybe this is the question. Does the public view the sitting vice president as an extension of the leader or as an independent political actor?
And just intuitively, Robert, thinking about it, I would have expected elections where a sitting vice president runs for the presidency. I would have expected those elections to have more in common with other elections that featured no incumbent candidate. That seems to me to be the most consistent with the results that we found in the paper. But that's why we do the research, to find out.
Well, just to be clear, we're talking about elections where one candidate serves as vice president when they run for president. For example, the election of 1988, when George H.W. Bush was Ronald Reagan's sitting vice president when Bush ran for president. And you're not talking about elections like 2020, where a former vice president ran for the White House.
Precisely, Robert. The VP had to have been the vice president in the incumbent administration at the time they ran for president, because really what we're doing here is we're looking to see whether the market served as an election indicator for the incumbent party in such cases.
But what did you see when you ran those numbers?
Well, prior to 2024, a total of 8 candidates had won a major party's nomination for president while serving as the sitting VP. 4 of those vice presidents went on to win, 4 went on to lose. Now, the average percentage change in the stock market over the 4 years prior to the election was 41.95% when the VP went on to win, and it was 24.62% for the losers. So that result may appear consistent with the notion that a stronger market bodes well for the incumbent party. But the fascinating thing, Robert, is that the result reverses when we look at the average stock market performance in the 1, 2, and 3 years leading up to the election.
Which is to say, you mean the market's average performance was stronger when the VP went on to lose versus when the VP won?
That is right. And you know what gets even stranger? In the elections of 1800 and 1860, the sitting vice president was the nominee of a major party that differed from the incumbent party. So if we omit those from the analysis, the stock market's average performance ends up being stronger for the eventual losers in the 1, 2, 3, and 4 years prior to the election.
Right. That said, I still assume you're not suggesting that a strong stock market is a negative side for incumbent VP who seeks the big promotion. Isn't it probably more likely that with just 8 elections, 6 of them, if you omit 1800 and 1860, that's too small a sample size to reach a firm conclusion?
Well, I think you raise a great point there, Robert. And indeed, I think we're really just looking at an artifact of the small number of data points that history has provided. I'm inclined to hypothesize, as we did in that 2012 paper, that the stock market will be a reliable election indicator for cases when a sitting president seeks another term. When the sitting president sits out the election, it seems that the stock market as an election indicator sits out as well.
Yeah, even if social mood, as reflected by the stock market, even if it can't tell us much about the outcome, it can tell us quite a lot about the context of the race and the political climate. As I recall, we touched on that when we talked about assassination attempts at incumbent presidents who withdrew from the race. The market also proved useful in 2016, as I recall, to understand the rise of a candidate like Donald Trump.
Well, you wrote a cover story on that theme in the March 2016 issue of The Socionomist before Trump had even won the nomination. At the time, I remember you zeroed in on his rejection of political correctness in the context of a waxing negative mood trend as reflected in Dow Gold to account for that trend. Now, Dow Gold remains below its all-time high, and the debate over political correctness, and I would say even more generally, the debate over speech, has only intensified as terms like hate speech, censorship, disinformation have all entered the mainstream political discourse. I mean, that discourse has only grown stronger in the years since 2016.
Yeah, alas, it's not a secret to anybody that political civility seems to get more scarce by the day. If social mood does become more negative, I think we should expect political words and deeds to likewise become more extreme. Those of us who would prefer to shake hands and wish our opponents good luck after a political context, maybe the silver lining in all this is that a more broadly positive trend in social mood should bring, you hope, a return of a more collegial spirit in politics.
Well, trends do not go in one direction forever, that is for sure. History is a story of change, but pattern change. And here on Mood and Markets, we do our best to show you those patterns so you can understand the past and present and perhaps even be better prepared for the future as well. Okay, that will do it for the show today. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell, drop a comment. It really does help the channel. Thank you for watching. And Robert, thank you for this conversation. Let's talk again soon.
Sounds great, Matt. Let's do.